I didn't first notice them in history books, not in academic journals, not in official archives. I noticed them in the margins inside photographs. Old photographs, the kind with sepia tones and heavy grain, where everything feels simultaneously more real and more uncertain. Images that look like evidence, yet feel like fragments of a memory we were never meant to keep. In those photographs are people, extraordinarily tall people, not tall by modern standards, not the occasional outlier explained away by genetics. These individuals exceed the comfortable limits of human height that we've been taught to accept as fixed and universal. According to the prevailing narrative of biology and evolution, they shouldn't exist at all, certainly not in numbers, and certainly not integrated into everyday life. And then suddenly they vanish. Not gradually, not through a documented decline in average height, not through medical records tracking disease, mutation, or slow genetic drift. They simply stop appearing somewhere after 1800 by 1850. At the latest, the photographic record changes. The giants disappear as if someone flipped a switch. One moment they're there, standing in plain sight. The next, they're gone. As I began to investigate this absence, an unsettling pattern emerged. The timing aligns almost perfectly with something else we've already explored in this series: the rapid disappearance of Tartaria from maps, records, and collective memory. The correlation is too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Let me be clear about what these images show. These are not circus performers, not sideshow attractions, not isolated cases of gigantism or acromegaly that modern medicine understands well. In many photographs, there are multiple individuals standing together, 7, 8, sometimes 9 feet tall or more. They're wearing work clothes, military uniforms, farmers' garments, laborers' attire. They stand beside families, co-workers, tools, and buildings as if their presence required no explanation. There is no spectacle, no signage, no indication they're being displayed as curiosities. The most disturbing aspect isn't their size, it's the normality of their existence, because these photographs suggest something deeply uncomfortable, that at one point in time, people like this were ordinary enough not to warrant comment. And when something once ordinary vanishes from history without explanation, the question isn't whether it existed, the question is, what happened to it? The pattern doesn't remain abstract for long. It becomes concrete the moment you begin examining specific photographs. One image stands out immediately. Taken in Siberia, circa 1870. 3 men stand beside a standard doorframe. Not a ceremonial gate, not an exaggerated structure. A functional entrance to a building that still exists today. I compared the image against the documented dimensions of that structure. The doorway measures approximately 12 feet high. 2 of the men are of average height. The third has to duck. He's not posing. He's not centered in the frame. He's wearing work clothes, thick fabric, practical boots. His posture suggests boredom more than pride. This isn't a staged image celebrating an anomaly. It's a work crew. The kind of photograph taken to document labor, not marvels. And then there's another image, this one from the American frontier, dated 1883. 7 workers stand together. 3 of them tower over the others by what appears to be 3 feet or more. Again, no theatrics, no indication of performance. Their faces look tired. Their stance is casual. These are people doing a job. Not being exhibited, the ordinariness of these images is what makes them so disturbing, because if these individuals were rare abnormalities, we would expect spectacle, explanation, context. Instead, we get silence. The camera treats them the same way it treats everyone else, as part of the background of daily life. And this isn't an isolated case. The same visual logic repeats across continents: Russia, North, America, Europe, Asia, wherever Tartarian architecture appears. These unusually tall individuals appear alongside it. And wherever the architecture becomes buried, repurposed, or stripped of its original function, the giants vanish from the record. Up until a certain point, These photographs exist in relative abundance. Then they stop. Not gradually, not with declining frequency. They stop abruptly, as if there were suddenly no longer any giants left to photograph. This raises a simple but devastating question. Where did they go? And that's where the mud flood becomes impossible to ignore. Previous investigations have documented entire cities buried beneath meters of sediment. First floors transformed into basements. Streets raised. Windows that once faced open air now sealed below ground. A global architectural pattern suggesting a catastrophic burial event sometime in the mid to late 1800s. The timing aligns almost perfectly with the disappearance of the giants from the photographic record. Not approximately. Almost exactly. That alignment forces a question far more unsettling than coincidence allows. What if the mud flood wasn't just geological? What if it marked a reset not only of cities and infrastructure, but of the people who understood them? To understand the disappearance of the giants, we have to look closely at what survived them. The buildings across the world, remnants of Tartarian architecture, still stand. Massive stone structures with proportions that feel wrong, doorways that are far too tall, windows positioned half buried at street level, ceilings so high they seem excessive for any practical human use. Official explanations call this aesthetic choice or symbolic grandeur, or simply architectural fashion. But those explanations collapse under scrutiny, because these structures weren't just large. They were functional. The oversized doors weren't ceremonial, they were used. The buried floors weren't decorative, they were once ground level. The enormous internal spaces weren't meant to impress visitors, they were designed to be worked in. Worked in by whom? Once you factor the giants back into the equation, the architecture begins to make sense. Doorways that now look absurdly tall become perfectly proportional. Ceilings that seem wasteful suddenly feel practical. Architectural features we've reclassified as purely ornamental start resembling access points, control surfaces, or structural interfaces. And then there's the technology. Many Tartarian buildings exhibit signs of systems far more advanced than what mainstream history allows for. The 18th and early 19th centuries. Atmospheric electricity collectors, harmonic resonance chambers, integrated water and air circulation systems, built directly into stone and metal frameworks. These weren't passive structures, they were machines that required operators. Modern engineers struggle to explain how these buildings were constructed using the tools allegedly available at the time. Even more puzzling is how such complex systems were operated without leaving behind detailed manuals, schematics, or training documentation, unless the knowledge was never written down, unless it was embodied. Knowledge transmitted through demonstration rather than text, through physical interaction with systems scaled for bodies far larger than ours. Giants standing 8, 9, even 10 feet tall could reach components housed in ceilings that we now assume are merely decorative. They could manipulate mechanisms, integrated into walls and arches that no longer make functional sense at human scale. Seen through this lens, the absence of technical documentation isn't evidence of loss. It's evidence of design. The buildings were never meant to be operated by normal-sized humans, and when their operators disappeared, the systems became inert. Functional technology degraded into mysterious architecture. Purpose was rebranded as aesthetics. Utility faded into historical curiosity. Museums replaced machines. We preserved the shells, but lost the function. And with the giants gone, no one remained who could explain how these structures truly worked or why they existed in the first place. Which brings us back to the central question. If these beings were essential to the operation of Tartarian infrastructure, then their disappearance wasn't incidental. It was catastrophic. If the giants truly existed and the photographic evidence strongly suggests they did, then their disappearance creates a problem that conventional history cannot solve. You don't lose an entire category of humanity by accident. Populations don't vanish without war, disease, famine, or migration leaving scars in the record. Yet for these individuals, there are no mass graves. No pandemics, no conflicts, no refugee trails, just absence, and absence, when examined closely, begins to look deliberate. As I move deeper into historical archives from the mid to late 1800s, patterns emerged. Hospital records that abruptly end, census data that becomes inconsistent, fragmented, or missing entirely. Entire years where specific categories of documentation simply do not exist, not destroyed by fire or war, but absent as if they were never created or were carefully removed. The gaps are too consistent, too synchronized, too widespread. Even more troubling is what does survive. Military records occasionally list individuals with heights that border on the impossible, then never mention them again. Medical anomalies appear once, then vanish from subsequent reports. References to unusually large individuals show up in one account of an event, only to be completely absent from another account of the same incident. These are not clerical errors, they are contradictions. Then there are the photographs themselves. Many early images featuring extremely tall individuals exist only in altered forms. Today, cropped, rescued, corrected. Later reprints normalize proportions, subtly reducing the apparent height of certain figures. In modern reproductions, the giants look merely tall. Instead of impossibly large, I've compared original glass plate negatives to their published versions. The changes are undeniable. Someone has been actively working to make these images less anomalous, less disruptive to the official narrative. The effort appears systematic rather than accidental, too precise, too consistent across institutions and countries. Which raises the most disturbing possibility of all. What if the mud flood wasn't just a catastrophe but a cover? A global burial event that submerged cities, destroyed infrastructure, and forced survivors into chaos would be the perfect moment to erase inconvenient people from history. In the confusion of rebuilding, memory becomes fragile. Narratives become malleable. Authority belongs to whoever controls resources, records, and reconstruction. If the giants were removed, whether through relocation, elimination, or something else entirely, the mud flood would provide plausible deniability. Fold their disappearance into the trauma of the reset. Wait a generation. Rewrite the textbooks. Suppress the photographs. Let time finish the erasure, and the pattern repeats worldwide. North America, Europe, Australia, Tartarian structures remain. We find the same silence. The same gap? The same period where extremely tall individuals simply stop existing in the record. Not dead. Not defeated. Just gone. What haunts me most isn't the presence of giants in old photographs. It's their absence in modern narratives. There is a complete and total silence around what should be one of the most significant anthropological questions of our era. No serious debate, no mainstream inquiry, no official curiosity about where these beings went or why. In silence, on this scale, is never neutral. Consider again what we know about Tartarian technology: atmospheric electricity systems embedded into architecture, harmonic resonance chambers, integrated water purification and air circulation built directly into massive stone structures. Systems so sophisticated they blur the line between building and machine. You don't create technology like that and then abandon it. You don't build systems of such complexity without operational knowledge, maintenance protocols, or succession plans unless that knowledge was never meant to be written down, unless it lived in people, unless it required bodies capable of physically interacting with systems designed at a different scale. Giants standing 8, 9, 10 feet tall could reach components housed in ceilings that now seem decorative. They could manipulate mechanisms embedded into arches and towers that modern historians dismiss as ornamental excess. They could operate structures whose proportions now feel wasteful, inefficient, illogical only because the intended operators are gone. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The buildings weren't oversized for humans. They were perfectly sized for someone else, and when those operators disappeared, functionality collapsed into mystery. Living technology fossilized into architecture. Purpose was stripped away and replaced with aesthetics. We inherited shells without instructions, museums without manuals. The official narrative insists that progress is linear, that each generation surpasses the last. But what if that's wrong? What if we're not advancing into a golden age, but climbing out of a collapse? What if we mistake recovery for innovation, reconstruction for progress? The buildings suggest that possibility. They're more durable than modern construction, more energy efficient, more harmonized with natural systems, and they were allegedly built with tools far inferior to what we possess today, unless the builders had access to knowledge we've lost, knowledge guarded, operated, and embodied by beings who no longer appear in our history books. The giants may have been the bridge between worlds, between an old civilization and whatever came after. And when they were removed, however, that removal occurred, the bridge burned behind them. We may be technological orphans, piecing together fragments of a wisdom that was once commonplace. I don't claim to have answers, but the questions matter. Why do the photographs stop? Why does documentation of extremely tall individuals vanish after a specific date? Why does that disappearance align so precisely with global mudflood evidence? Who benefited from their removal? And if such a coordinated erasure was possible once, what prevents it from happening again? The giants are gone. The buildings remain hollow, repurposed, misunderstood. And we're left with doorways built for bodies that officially never existed. History tells us we're imagining things, but absence can be evidence too. Negative space shaped exactly like the truth. We're not allowed to remember.